After I'd done my initial military training, and after I'd done the radio mechanics training, I volunteered for the paratroops, and which was amazing experience and amazing people that I met. One of them had already been in action with the SAS, but officially he couldn't wear a paratroops badge because he'd never done the official training. But I met some amazing people, but unfortunately during the training I had an accident and broke my arm, which has never straightened out ever since.
Welcome back to For Honour's Sake, the podcast from the Association of Jewish Ex-Servicemen and Women. I'm Dan Fox, Chair Emeritus of AJEX, and today we're in the lovely home of 100 years young Maurice Jay. Maurice, thank you so much for having us today.
A pleasure.
Perhaps we can start where we always do. We begin at the beginning. Where and when were you born, and what was it like growing up?
I was born in the area of Notting Hill, which was a very different type of area in those days. Probably referred to as sort of lower middle class.
And this was 1925?
In 1925.
And where did you go to school there?
No, by the time I was at school age, we had moved to an area which really didn't have a name. It was partway between Harlesden and Willesden, and it had been farmland, and they had built a street of middle-class homes adjacent to a depot which was full of horses because it was used for the delivery vehicles of the United Dairies. And as I went to school, I used to take a shortcut through the stables, which at first I was a little bit scared of, these enormous horses, but that was something I soon got used to.
And what did your parents do? What was your family life like?
My father was in the rag trade, and moderately successful, although he was affected by the various economic difficulties the country had during the 1920s and 30s. And my mother had been to Pitman's secretarial school, and she was able to help my father by dealing with the books and accounts and things like that.
Yeah. And where did you go to school?
I went to school. The first school I went to was, I think, what we would refer to as an old dames school. It was run by two they seemed like elderly ladies to me at that time. They were probably middle-aged. But at that time, if you were middle class or lower middle class, you didn't go to a state primary school. That would have been extremely unusual. So this was something between something a bit lower than a public school, but privately run. It consisted of one large room, which for certain lessons were divided into half for the youngest and for the slightly older. We used to laugh at the sign outside, which described it as a high school for girls, preparatory for boys. The implications of that amused us, of course.
Some amusement. And where did you go to secondary school?
Sorry?
And secondary school.
Secondary school, I had the good fortune, I believe, of going to a type of school which was created when the school leaving age was raised, I think from 14 to 16, and there were not enough schools to cater for all the extra children, and a category of school was invented that was comparable to a modern comprehensive school. So there were 3 levels within the school. The top level would prepare you for university, the middle level for some lower but academic content, and the lower grade for young boys and girls who would go into some manual level of work in engineering or something. So it was like an early version of a comprehensive school.
And what level did you find yourself in?
I was in the top academic level. The headmaster was a Quaker, and at a time when corporal punishment was still common, he did not permit it.
And were there particular subjects you enjoyed, particular topics you pursued?
Well, I was good at mathematics and physics, and fortunate, and then obviously it's relevant that both those subjects had good teachers.
Of course.
And that helped. Yeah. But those were my subjects, mathematics and physics.
And what age did you leave? What age did you leave the school? What age did you move on? And was that into work or higher education?
From school, well, of course, I was part way through the school when the war began.
Okay, so you were 14 when the war, 14 or 15 when war broke out?
I have to do the arithmetic again.
You must have been 14, I think, or maybe young. You might have been.
I was born in
1925.
25.
Yeah. War broke out in September.
Yes, I was 14.
You're 14.
Quite right.
14.
I was 14.
And as a young man in London, did you have a sense of the war coming? Did you have a sense of the seriousness of what was about to happen to the world?
Yes, very much so. I was already reading a lot, including Professor Lasky, and I was very conscious of the way that the British government was appeasing Hitler, and I was already politically conscious.
And so, when at the outbreak of war, your education was interrupted, or was it able to continue?
Evacuated.
You were evacuated. So, where were you evacuated to?
Northampton, and I was very fortunate that I was billeted on a young couple who were quite unusual, and the wife in particular had been the daughter of a farm manager. I think there's a special word for such a category, but very impossible to put them into a class category. And her husband eventually went into I think it was the Air Force that manned the anti-aircraft guns in London. And so I was living alone with this lady. But she was quite a character, because one thing I'll never forget is that when she went shopping, she would eat her cheese ration for the week on her way home from the shop, and then present me with my minute portion of cheese and said, eat it whenever you feel like it, because it was so small. Yeah. So she was quite an unusual character.
Yeah. And how long were you evacuated for?
I think it was 2 years before I came back to London. But of course we were only getting half a day's education, because we went to our co-ed school was split up I didn't mention that my school in London was co-ed, and we, the boys, went to a local grammar school, separated from the girls, and we had mornings only while the local boys had afternoons only. So we were only really getting half a day of education.
Yeah.
And I think some of our best teachers, the younger ones, younger men, went into the army.
Of course, yeah.
So the war had quite a big impact on my education.
Of course. Mm-hmm. So you were back in London probably around the age of 16.
Yep.
And were you working then, or were you straight into the Home Guard?
I went straight into higher education, and indeed into the Home Guard.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the Home Guard had been established in 1940 to essentially exploit those who weren't eligible yet or had passed the age in the other direction for military service, to form you as a home defence unit.
That's right. But also, and not many people know this, at night, some of us manned the anti-aircraft guns in London to give the RAF men a bit of a break. And so once a week, I think, I did night duty on a rocket site on Hampstead Heath.
And how old were you at that point?
At that point, I was 17, I suppose. And so that was my first experience of military activity.
And how long did that last for? How long were you doing that?
I was doing that until I went in the army 2 years later, at 18.
Which regiment did you join?
Well, after the initial training, I was in the Royal Signals and trained as a radio mechanic, well, operator and mechanic, obviously.
And that took you all around the country?
Well, I did my initial training in Catterick, which was pretty famous, of course.
Still is.
And I continued with my training as a radio mechanic, also in Catterick.
And you did you miss London, your family? Did you miss the role that you had as the anti-aircraft gunner? Were you missing all that?
No, because when I came back to London, the air raids were still taking place, and my mother had moved from Harlesden to the West End, which sounds a strange thing to do, but it was in a way safer than the area where we lived, which was near to Willesden Junction, which was a target. And she lived in Tottenham Court Road in a modern block of flats with an internal corridors leading to the flats. So at night, when there was an air raid, we'd carry our mattress into the corridor to avoid the risks of flying glass, which was quite entertaining.
So as a signaller, at some point you took up the opportunity for parachute training as well?
That was after I'd done my initial military training. And after I'd done the radio mechanics training, I volunteered for the paratroops, and which was an amazing experience and amazing people that I met. One of them had already been in action with the SAS, but officially he couldn't wear a paratroops badge because he'd never done the official training. But I met some amazing people, but unfortunately during the training I had an accident and broke my arm, which has never straightened out ever since. And by the time I'd finished my recuperation and went back to my unit, I arrived at the gate. They asked me who I was, and they said, well, there's nobody here. Just go home and we'll let you know where to report.
Right.
And I don't know what happened to all the men I trained with, and for whatever reason, I never made the effort to find out. So eventually, it didn't take very long before I was sent to a depot in East Anglia, where we started training for warfare in the Far East, up to our necks in the fens, getting wet, being trained to fight the Japanese. WWII Day, the war in Europe, had happened, I think, already.
So May 1945 by then. So.
Yeah, then it was by 45, and so I did the training for jungle warfare, and I was on embarkation leave when I bought the morning paper, and the atom bomb had been dropped.
Yeah. So the atom bomb dropped. Also, the Japanese heard you were coming, so they surrendered.
And exactly. And but of course we were never told where we were going.
No.
And it turned out that I was going on a troop ship, a luxurious troop ship, but for the officers anyway, the Empress of Britain, and we sailed off via South Africa, where we got short leave for 12 hours, and finished up in Kenya, a place with the wonderful name of Gil. And I was there for nearly a year when suddenly we were all sent off to somewhere else. Of course, you're never told in advance when you're going. And we were sent back to Nairobi, where we got a boat and put on this terrible, terrible boat that took us to Egypt. I'm going on and on and
Not
on.
at all. No, this is what we're here to talk about. So you must have sailed up the Suez Canal from
the Suez Canal, which was quite an experience, of course. And to Suez at first, of course. And after a while in a transit camp, I got a posting on my own. Now, I was still only a private soldier, and of all places, was sent to Benghazi.
And what did you end up doing there?
What?
What did you end up doing in Libya?
Well, nothing. There was nothing really for me to do when I got there. It wasn't long after the Germans had been defeated.
Sure.
And we took over a house that was alive with bugs. We had to set fire to all the beds to get rid of them.
Wow.
It wasn't all that long after the Germans had been defeated, and the Jewish community, the large Jewish community of Benghazi, who had gone into villages in the surroundings, had come back to the town. And I got to know the Jewish community. I had some difficulty convincing them I was Jewish, because they spoke Hebrew as their natural language as well as Italian. But I convinced them I was Jewish, and I would have been a good catch for one of their daughters. So I was in Benghazi, with absolutely, again, nothing to do. 2 German POWs had the skills I didn't have of repairing teleprinters.
Right.
And Benghazi was
like a relay station, or
a relay station from further west back to Cairo. It was part of the link back to Europe, and totally dependent on these 2 Germans who were ex-POWs because the war was over,
Sure.
who were able to repair and maintain the teleprinters, which I had no such skill.
Yeah.
And one was tall and blonde, and I was convinced he was a Nazi. One was short and dark, and I was convinced he was an anti-Nazi.
So what was that like as a young British Jewish serviceman suddenly working with 2 former members of the Wehrmacht, I assume, or perhaps other units?
It was
just
bizarre.
after the war.
It was totally bizarre.
And
I had absolutely nothing to do again.
Sure.
And except read books and get drunk.
And did you find yourself involved with the Jewish community much there? Were you going to? Did they invite you for Friday night dinner? Were you there for the synagogues, or was it just that you had contacts?
I was invited to a evening. I suppose it must have been an Erev Shabbat evening. Drinks and snacks once, only once. A lot of it is a bit unclear, my memory of my period there. I was drinking arak at a penny a glass, and I was totally fed up.
Yeah, I can imagine. More generally, while you were in the army, did you have much chance of a Jewish life within military service, or was that something that was just left behind at home?
Well, I didn't have much of a Jewish life at home.
Fair enough.
Both my parents were not practicing Jews, especially my mother. My father used to go to synagogue on the high holy days, but he wasn't in any way religious. My mother had been brought up on the Isle of Wight. We used to make jokes that she was probably the only Jew on the island. And her parents were not religious either, I don't think.
And were you demobilised from Benghazi, or were you moved on again?
From Benghazi, I won a ballot to get home leave.
Fantastic.
Which was very welcome. And after a long staying in Suez or Cairo, I can't remember which, waiting for a boat back to Europe, where I met up with men who'd been away since the beginning of the war. Eventually, we got a boat back to port in the south of France.
Marseille?
No, the other one. Toulon.
Yeah.
Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Eventually, I got back to Britain, and my mother, who had all the cheek in the world, she went to the military establishment and convinced them that as I was going to be demobbed soon, it was ridiculous to send me back to North Africa.
Makes sense.
And she convinced them that it was a waste of time. And so I spent 6 months, I think it was, in Chatham, attached to some unit of the army. I was given the task of typing out the daily schedule of activities, which took me about 15 minutes with nothing else whatsoever to do for the rest of the day. But I got permission to sleep at home. And so I was able to go back to college for evening classes.
And what subject were you pursuing?
I was studying architecture, which is what I'd been doing before I went in the army.
And was that a career that you then pursued?
I went back to college. I was not comfortable at college. I couldn't settle down. And after 1 year, I left college and started work as an architectural assistant. Did that for a couple of years. And then was able to get a job on the Architect's Journal.
And so began a career in journalism.
And which was a great career move for me, because it turned out to be a career that I was better suited to than architecture. I liked the quick results. In architecture, I was always finishing a job that someone else had started, or I was starting a job that somebody else would finish, because I never stayed in a job for more than a year.
Yes.
And so journalism was a perfect change for me. At college, I'd edited the college magazine, mm-hmm. and so I'd had some experience of amateur journalism, which obviously helped me get the job on the Architect's Journal. And that's when my life all began to change completely.
And it's a career that took you all over the world.
So
it took you all over the world, your career as a journalist.
No, not,
oh, right.
not at that stage. No, not at that stage.
What sort of magazines and newspapers did you work on?
Well, I started on the Architect's Journal. And from there, I got on a job at the Times on one of they had a supplement called the Times Review of Industry, a monthly supplement. So I got a job there, and I was sacked from there. I never found out why. But I'd been to a cocktail party, and I'd made some joke about my boss.
Right.
My boss was a Welshman, and when my wife and I was married by then, my wife and I called our son David, a nice Jewish name, but my Welsh boss thought I'd done so in his honour.
Right.
And I mentioned this as an anecdote of the cocktail party. It must have got back to my boss, or there was some other reason. And I was politely given the sack and given an unlimited amount of time in which to, at full pay, in which to find another job. But this was the time of Suez. And I had probably been saying the wrong things about the Jewish war of whatever that war was, that the 6 Days War.
So Suez. So Israel was involved in Suez.
Yeah.
That was 56. They were part of
the 56 war,
the alliance with the French and.
Anyway, so I never found out the true reason why I was sacked. Making a joke about my boss, or saying the wrong things about Suez. Or maybe he was no good at the job. I don't.
I'm sure that wasn't the case. But the career, nonetheless, in journalism pursued. I think you worked for the Jewish media at some point, and
I was offered 2 or 3 jobs, I think, on the basis of having worked at the Times, and a good friend of mine in the trade union recommended that I took one job, which was to launch a magazine for one of the big publishing companies. a magazine of interior design, which connects with architecture,
Of course, yeah.
and was a very wise choice. And no, I had full-time jobs. I did that one for about 6 years till I got bored with it. And I had various other full-time jobs. But there came to the point where I'd reached the peak of what was possible for me. And I was still quite young. I was only 30 when I was editing this magazine of interior design. And I went to see my ex-boss, who was very... he had on the wall behind him, he'd been promoted to IPC's main branch. Behind his desk he had magazine covers of all the magazines in the group. And he said, well, which one would you like? Pointing behind him. And I looked at all these magazines and I said, I don't really want to work for any of them. He said, I knew that. So from there onwards, I became a freelance.
And you were very involved in the National Union of Journalists as well.
And
the NUJ.
I was very involved in the National Union of Journalists as soon as I became a journalist. And I suppose I took the first steps up the ladder by going to branch meetings, by speaking, by being on the branch committee, by being a delegate to the NUJ's annual conference. And I could see the pattern. National conference, speak at the national conference, on the national committee. Next step, a candidate for an MP in an area where there's no chance of being elected. Next step, candidate where there's some chance of being elected. Next step, MP. And I said, no, this is not for me.
Right.
This is not for me. But I was very active in the union and nearly brought the whole of IPC to a standstill once because some woman on a women's magazine got a new editor, and this new editor sacked a woman who'd been there for donkey's years on the grounds that she was incompetent. I took the matter up. I said, she's been satisfactory for the previous editor. If it's not satisfactory for you, then you must be asking her to do a different job. She's entitled to redundancy money. And so we had a meeting, and all these women for these women magazines voted 100% to go on strike.
Glad to hear it.
So I went to my boss and told him what had happened, and they agreed to give her a very adequate compensation money on condition that we didn't publicise it and use it as a... Anyway, that's how I...
Incredible work, that's amazing.
So that was my highlight of my career as a NUJ.
Yeah. And along the way in all this, you met your first wife, Gina.
Right, on the way. Quite a way back on the way. Yes. That's another long story in a way.
But you settled down with her and you had a family, you had at least one son? Or
we settled down. We had one son, as in the photo. And that was in the days when my sister-in-law cousin, a young lady, heard that my wife was getting married to me, she said, "Oh, wonderful! She won't have to go to work anymore." That was the routine in those days.
Yes, of course, yeah.
And in fact, she didn't. I earned in a day what she earned in a week, and then we had a child, so she was available to look after our child until he was able to come home on his own. And then she worked for Oxfam and ran one of their most successful shops in Marylebone High Street.
Very nice.
And for some years, I was in charge of the shop where, at a time when women were giving diamond rings to Oxfam, they weren't sold in the shops, they went to head office. So she worked for Oxfam for some years, and she'd been a nursery nurse. She was kinder transport, I didn't mention that before.
Yeah.
She was on the last... Did I mention that before?
You did, yes. Yeah.
On the last boat to Danzig.
Yes,
from Danzig.
Wow, amazing.
And her brother, of course.
Yeah.
Her brother had come 6 months before.
Mm-hmm. So just two last things I wanted to talk to you about, Maurice. First of all, who were the most famous people that you interviewed or met as a journalist?
Oh, I think I interviewed an archbishop, cabinet minister.
Do you remember which ones?
Oh, I can't remember his name now either.
That's okay. And then about 10 or 15 years ago, you struck up an acquaintance with the acclaimed documentary filmmaker Bruno Sorrentino.
Yes.
And that ended up with you going to Mali.
Yes, he told me he was going to Mali and Timbuktu, and I said, "Oh, can you take me with?" He said, "No, don't be ridiculous," or something. And then a week or two later, phoned me up, "Are you ready to go?" I said, "Where?" He said, "Timbuktu." You said, "Well, then come." Are you joking? No.
And how old were you at this point?
What?
How old were you at this point? This is only about 10 or 15 years ago?
About 67,
a bit longer,
65,
okay. Right,
something like that.
A bit longer.
And I had to go out and buy loads and loads of dried food, dried eggs.
So you were the quartermaster for the production?
I was the quartermaster, yes.
Production.
And off I went to Mali, which was an amazing experience.
I bet.
I remember as a child I'd heard of Timbuktu and not realising there was an actual place called Timbuktu. Sure. And what an amazing place it had been. I mean, maybe you know this, but Timbuktu was incredibly rich.
Yeah, it had the great library of Timbuktu, and
yes, because it was
incredible civilization.
Staging post before you cross the Sahara, and the exchange rate was 1 kilo of gold from West Africa via Timbuktu, 1 kilo of gold for 1 kilo of wheat. Or rice. 1 kilo of rice, 1 kilo of gold. When the emperor of Timbuktu went on the Hajj, he was throwing gold pieces into the street for the people. Yes. I mean, it's a fascinating place to have been to. Yes.
Well, Maurice, it's been an incredible life, a very full one, a very interesting one, and it's just so amazing to have you still with us and able to share with us today so much of your experiences. As a small thank you, I'd like to present you with the Ajax plaque.
Amazing!
Just a token of our appreciation for everything you've done for our country, for our community, and for having us here, and for your time and insight today. Thank you very much.
You're very, very welcome, and thank you. I will find an appropriate place among my other mementos.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.